to Dialogue Across Difference, an event series hosted by the Center for the Study of Politics and Governance at the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Join us as Center Director Larry Jacobs and guests engage in conversations across the political and policy spectrum on issues of the day.
For those of you who like a live transcript and are joining us online, you'll see at the bottom of the screen there's a button. That's for you. Feel free to click it. So let's get down to business here. We are just thrilled to have Thomas Friedman from the New York Times with us. Today's program, America First, my version. Tom Friedman, as many of you know, columnist from the New York Times for decades now, 1981. And he started his career working abroad. He was bureau chief in 1982, Jerusalem bureau chief in 1984, diplomatic correspondent in DC, later the Washington correspondent, and economic correspondent as well. So Milton Friedman and Tom Friedman. He's won 3 Pulitzers, and his book, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, was an international bestseller. When he gives a talk in China, millions click on it. So it's really a great pleasure to have Tom Friedman with us. And he was born and raised in Minnesota, and it's become an important part of his identity and orientation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Great, Larry, it's great to be with you.
I know you've been working on a new book.
Mm-hmm.
How's that going?
It's going well, first of all, but thank you all for coming out, and those of you watching from distant galaxies, thank you for tuning in. I'm working on a book that is about how to write a column, since everyone wants to be a columnist today. And so I thought I'd write a book about how you do it. And but the first half of the book is how to write a column. And the second half of the book is what I saw while writing a column. Because as Larry said, 2028 will be my 50th year. And so just to kick us off, Larry, I'll talk about the second half of the book. What did I see? You know, anyone who's been a journalist, you know, on duty for 50 years is pretty sure that they were here for the big one. Okay? World War I, World War II, Vietnam, rise of China, the internet, you name it. But my argument is that we all actually were here for the big one. I always remind people that when Gutenberg invented the printing press, you know, someone was alive, and some monk said to some priest, "Now that is really cool." I mean, I don't have to write this Bible longhand anymore. We're gonna, how did you put it? Print it. Okay. So we are here for a similar moment. And I call this moment the second Big Bang. So the first Big Bang was set up by God, by the Creator 13.8 billion years ago. And the second Big Bang was set up by us. That we have become godlike in 7 different ways. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th, and we have become godlike in 7 different ways. First, we've created an artificial brain greater than the Creator endowed us with. We've disconnected intelligence from human biology. That is a godlike act. Second, we have created a planetary nervous system where we can now hear each other whisper. Yeah, we can hear each other whisper from one end of the planet to the other. We don't have quite godlike omniscience, but we're getting there. Third, we created our own new galaxy called cyberspace. We created a whole new galaxy where we're all connected and no one's in charge. Fourth, we split the atom. And so we can actually now are the first generation that can destroy the world the way God did with Noah. Fifth, we changed the climate. So no member of our species, no Homo sapiens, have ever driven themselves from one climate epoch into another. In our case, from the Holocene, the last 11,700 years, into the Anthropocene. No member of our species has ever done that. Six, we created deep learning. Back in 2012, IBM wired Lake George in upstate New York. What they did was they put sensors everywhere, on the beach, in the muck, in the mud, on the bottom, in the waves, in the middle. And then they fed all that data into that big data that we thought that was really cool. And Rensselaer Polytechnic studied it. And when they did that, the man who ran the project, John Kelly from IBM Research, who was a friend of mine, gave me my all-time favorite quote. 50 years, something has to be your favorite quote, right? So he said to me, Tom, I have to tell you, the world has been speaking to us all these years. We just couldn't hear it. And now we're going to be able to hear it, okay? We're going to be able to hear the forest speak, the lake speak, your liver speak. We're going to have deep hearing that is utterly godlike. And lastly, this is what's coming to a theater near you, I don't know, in 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. The combination of, so your human biology is too complicated for a supercomputer even to model, but not for a quantum computer. And when we get quantum computing, combined with fusion energy, combined with AI, we will have unlimited compute, unlimited clean energy, and AI, and that will be our Genesis moment. We will be able to create anything from the atomic level on an N of 1 scale just for you. So we actually are here for the big one. We become godlike in 7 different ways. We now have the power to part the Red Sea. Just one problem, without the 10 commandments. And that is our challenge going forward. We've developed godlike powers, but without the normative, regulatory, value system to govern these powers. And now we don't just need 10 commandments, we need 20. 10 for us and 10 for the AI. And that's what the book is about.
Fantastic. I brought a prompt. You may be familiar with this newspaper.
Yes.
And one of the things about the New York Times that's really striking is it's got teams of reporters, and one team will report on climate. There are other teams that cover the Midwest, and agriculture might come up. There's still other teams that would be tracking population change and migration. The business section is tracking AI and its significance or lack of significance of what it's doing in the markets. And each one of those is treated as a separate insular event. Now, your systems thinking is really challenging the way we go about that.
So, I always tell people, Larry, I'm quite honestly, this is not false. I'm not that smart. I scored 600 on my SATs. But I do something naturally, and if I knew how I did it, I'd bottle it and sell it. I'm a really good dot connector. So you say X and I say Y and Z, and I do that with everything, So one of the things I explain in the book, and maybe because it's read in a university setting, because it's related to this, is how I learn. I have a chapter on how I learn, because everyone learns differently. And I wish I could say I knew I was going to learn this way 40 years ago. I didn't, but looking back at time, I realized I developed a way of trying to navigate the world. And the way I did it is that I go to the edge of 3 different realms. Because it's at the edge where all the best learning happens. And it's at the edge where you actually get to name things. Wow, feels like it's kind of flat out here, So I went to the edge of 3 realms. The first edge I went to is the edge of human behavior. I lived in a civil war in Beirut for 5 years. And so I got to see how human molecules behave at extremely high temperatures in a way I never could growing up in St. Louis Park. I got to see what people are capable of for incredible evil. They used to shoot the Red Cross in Beirut, and amazing kindness under extreme pressure. So that completely widened my aperture of human behavior. At the same time, it taught me to be an anthropologist, because when I was in Beirut, there was no data, because there was no government. So the only data was talking to another human being. So I developed a very anthropological approach to journalism. Want to know what people think? Come to Minnesota, and I think I've interviewed already 25 people today, and it's not even noon, or it's just noon. So that's my way of learning. Now, living in a city with no data is interesting, because when I was first in Beirut, I was there with United Press International, the wire service, and one of my jobs back then, you'll recall when we were traveling, we wanted to know what the weather was going to be in Boston, Bangalore, Baltimore, and Beirut. And you went to the Star Tribune and it said high and low. And one of my jobs at UPI was to file the daily weather highlights. But there was no weatherman. So I made up the weather report every day. Ahmed, how did it feel out there today? Oh, Mr. Tom, kind of hot. 80, 81? Yeah, 81. High Beirut, 81. Last night, Ahmed, how was, oh, Mr. Tom, kind of cool. 65? Yeah, 65. Low Beirut, 65. And thus was the weather report filed from a city with no data. Second edge I went to was the edge of technology. Because when you're the foreign affairs columnist of the New York Times, as a journalist, you want to be touching the hot stove. The hot stove is the edge of the story. And I quickly discovered that the people touching the hot stove weren't just the State Department and the Pentagon. They were global companies like a Microsoft or an Amazon or a Walmart, or in my case, Infosys, the Indian high-tech outsourcing company in Bangalore. And I went to Bangalore in 2004 to do a documentary about outsourcing. And my last interview was Nandan Nilekani, the CEO of Infosys. And at one point, I had my laptop on my lap. I was interviewing him, and he said, Tom, I have to tell you, the global economic playing field is being leveled, and you Americans are not ready. Oh, I wrote that down on my little laptop, the global economic. We did the interview. I got back in my Jeep, went back from Electronic City in Bangalore to my hotel, about an hour ride. And the whole way I'm thinking over in my head, the global economic playing field is being leveled. What he's really telling me is the global economic playing field is being flattened. Oh my God, India's premier engineer entrepreneur just told me the world is flat. And I wrote that down in my notebook, the world is flat. I got back to my hotel in Bangalore, ran up to my room, called my wife in Bethesda and said, honey, I'm going to write a book called The World is Flat. She now says she thought that was a brilliant idea. That was not how I recall the conversation. That was, I only got that story because I was at the edge of the story with an incredible interpreter of what was going on the edge. So the last edge I went to is the edge of climate and environment. I've had the good fortune, because my wife was on the board of Conservation International, to visit pretty much every pristine ecosystem on the planet. And the US Navy took me on their ice exercise beneath the Arctic. It was an amazing experience. I did it first to learn about nature, because I didn't know much about nature, frankly. And then I did it to learn from nature, because I came to understand that the ecosystems that thrived when the climate changed were those that built complex adaptive networks, where all the elements of the ecosystem networked together to maximize their resilience, adaptability, and productivity. And I eventually translated that into human communities in my last book, talking then in part about Minneapolis, that the communities that would thrive in the age we're going into, when we have a change of the climate and the climate of technology, were those that built complex adaptive networks, where all the elements of the community network together to maximize their resilience, productivity, and adaptability by building healthy interdependencies. And so that became really central to my worldview. Now, what nature does it violently and emergently. The lamb eats the grass, the lion eats the lamb. That's how it builds healthy interdependency. What nature does emergently, we need to do intentionally. And you saw that here in Minnesota. You had a great demonstration of that in the last few months. Anyways, my worldview is to take those three perspectives and I arbitrage them together. So everywhere I go, I'm looking at the world through that 3D lens. So it's why I was the first person to point out that the Syrian revolution in 2011 actually was triggered by a drought. Syria experienced the worst drought in its history from 2006 to 2011. A million Syrian farmers and herders left their homes, flocked to the cities, overwhelmed the infrastructure. Assad did nothing for them. Then they got on cell phones and watched the revolution in Tunisia and Egypt, and then they blew the lid off the place. It was the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law all converging. And if you don't see the world in 3D, you won't see it. And so because of that, I'm just always connecting the dots, you know? I mean, you can't understand what happened here without understanding what winter does to people. As somebody said to me, don't come for winter people in winter, just as a general rule, Christy, so it's all, the world is a seamless thing. And so I see my job, Larry, when people ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I'm a translator from English to English. I take really complicated subjects that I do not understand. And if you've ever been around me in an interview, you'll know, and I say, stop, repeat that. Okay, now that is like that, and I break it down because I live by Marie Curie's motto, which is now is the time to understand more so we may fear less. And when you're living in a really complicated time, that's my form of idealistic journalism, enabling people to understand more so they may fear less, because we now live in a world where it's become a giant industry to make people stupid and angry. And my retaliation against that is to enable people to understand more so they may fear less.
You talk about in your book that's emerging the dangers, that this kind of simultaneous transformative change across these dimensions is really transforming the problems we face. And you can't take it on one at a time as a single problem, because climate is related to economics, it's related to population, it's related, and AI is obviously, as you said, having huge impacts in all of them. And you point to governance as a necessary step forward. If the world is going to steer in an intentional way, then we need to be thinking about collaborative governance. On the other hand, I wouldn't describe you as an optimistic person inherently reading the data. Yeah. You point to a lot of pretty scary scenarios. Yeah. So can you walk us through what is the kind of governance agenda in kind of concrete terms for a world that at a planetary level seems to be spinning and perhaps out of control?
I think maybe the best way I can attack that, Larry, is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And so I'm always asking, like, where am I? What world am I living in? What are the biggest trends? And so the chapter in my book that follows the second Big Bang is an attempt to answer the question, what era are we in now? Because I was born in the Cold War, 1953, I'm 72. I made most of my career in the post-Cold War, wonderful time, world was opening up, And somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years, the post-Cold War ended. U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, Russian invasion of Ukraine, the rise of China, whatever it is. We're not in the post-Cold War anymore. So I set myself the challenge of, well, where are we? Because what I was doing was I was calling it the post-Cold War. And I eventually said, no, that's really stupid. I mean, that's like pivoting off nothing. Like, what does that even mean, the post-Cold War, you dummy? One of my predecessors as a columnist, Walter Lippmann, was the one who named the Cold War. He wrote a 14-part essay, a series of columns in 1947, naming this the Cold War. So I thought, God, that'd be really cool if you could figure out what this era we're in, And so the journey started quite accidentally. I was in Aspen, Colorado 2 summers ago, and my technology tutor, I will say I am blessed to have a series of tutors from around the world, of whom Larry is a proud member. And I can call on them for any number of subjects. And I was in Aspen, and my tech tutor came to town, Craig Mundy, who was Chief Technology Officer of Microsoft, when I wrote The World is Flat, and really helped me with that book, and we've been dear friends ever since. And he tutored me on AI. So I didn't know anything about AI, really. And just walked me through the whole thing, and he explained to me that the goal of AI, the ultimate goal, was to achieve polymathic, artificial general intelligence. So that's an AI system that's mastered math, physics, chemistry, biology, computing, Shakespeare, Mozart, and baseball, and can reason across all these domains at a high dimension in a way no human could. I really like that, polymathic artificial general intelligence. Anyways, about a week later, I got a call from my climate tutor, Johann Rockström, who runs the Potsdam Institute in Germany, I think the premier Earth system scientist in the world, dear friend, helped me with previous books. And he said, Tom, I'm doing an event at the UN. I've got a new book coming out. And would you come to New York and do this event for me? It'll help it get publicity. I said, Johann, for you, anything. What's your book called? He said, it's called Polycrisis. I said, well, that's interesting. My AI tutor is talking about polymathic artificial intelligence, and my climate tutor is talking about polycrisis. The idea that we shouldn't talk about climate change anymore. It's climate change creates drought or flooding, creates crop destruction, creates internal migration, creates external migration, creates polycrisis. So then I started giving a speech on foreign policy that Secretary of State Blinken started quoting. And I thought, well, that's really cool. And the speech went like this. I would be meeting with a group of parents like you all, and I'd begin by saying, I want to talk to all the parents in the audience. Mom, Dad, if your son or daughter come home from college and say, Mommy, Daddy, I'd like to be the US Secretary of State one day. Tell them, honey, anything but that. Promise Mommy and Daddy you won't try to be Secretary of State. Secretary of Agriculture, Commerce, Health and Human Services, anything, sweetheart, but not Secretary of State. Why? Worst job in the world today. And the way I explain it is think of 2 US Secretaries of State and 2 October wars. October 1973 and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, October 2023, Secretary of State Tony Blinken. In 1973, Henry Kissinger needed 3 dimes, an airplane, in 3 months to produce the first disengagement peace agreements between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Syria. He needed a dime to call Israeli Prime Minister Golda Meir, a dime to call Syrian President Hafez al-Assad, a dime to call Anwar Sadat. 3 months, 3 dimes, Kissinger magic, and he produced the diplomatic equivalent of tic-tac-toe, 3 across, Egypt, Syria, Israel. Fast forward to Tony Blinken. Tony Blinken saw double and triple everywhere he went. He had to deal with inside Hamas and outside Hamas, political Hamas and military Hamas, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. In Lebanon, he had Iran, Hezbollah, and the Lebanese government. In Syria, he had the Syrian government, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah. In Iraq, he had 18 militias. In Yemen, he had 18 tribes. And in Israel, he had 18 parties. He was not playing tic-tac-toe. He had a Rubik's Cube, and he was trying to get all the colors aligned on one side of a Rubik's Cube at the same time. And if you've ever tried to do that, it's really hard. Promise Mommy and Daddy you won't try to be Secretary of State. Because Tony Blinken's world had become completely polyamorous and polymorphic. Then I started thinking about when I grew up in Minneapolis. Everything was binary. You're either white or black. You're either a man or a woman. You're either gay or straight. You're either Christian or Jewish. You're either in work or at school. You're either in school or at home. Everything was binary. Well, I don't need to tell you all what happened. I went to Elliott School, and my school near my house now is a community center where they speak 28 different languages, which is exactly 27 more than when I was there, okay? And this community has been incredibly polymorphic, an amazing way which we've seen. Then I was thinking, my dad, he had friends. I worked at a delicatessen, and the guy who ran the delicatessen had a bookie. And I used to sometimes overhear them saying, I'll take the Vikings to win by 7 points. It was a win-lose bet. The Vikings either win or lose. Now I can bet on whether the field goal will go more toward the left of the crosshairs than the right of the crosshairs. I can bet on every play, every pass, every person. On where? On Polymarket. And then I started thinking about these terrible people, these assassins who shot, including 2 Minnesota legislators, the guy who shot at Trump, the guy who shot at Charlie Kirk. If you notice the debates we have after each one, he's from the left, he's from the right. No, they're all polymorphic. They're radicalized on gaming platforms. They speak even a language we don't understand. They're a little left, they're a little right. And then I was just thinking this morning, watching CNBC, and they're talking about cryptocurrency. I grew up in a world that you either had paper currency or gold, okay? Now you have 1,000 different currencies, controlled by government. Well, you get the point. So I go back to Craig, and I say, Craig, what world are we in? what's the name of this era? And he says, it's obvious. We're in the Polycene. We're in the Polycene. That's the era we're in, a world where the world has gotten sharded into millions of little pieces. Each shard now has a voice, and they're all connected. And a world that's sharded, empowered, and connected, you don't want to be running anything, especially being a university president, when every shard is empowered and connected. So I think that's the age we're in. And the only way to manage in the Polycene is through what I call complex adaptive coalitions. Because the meta truth about the age we're in, this comes from my teacher, Dov Seidman. Dov says, you know, Tom, interdependence is no longer our choice. It's our condition. Interdependence is no longer our choice. It's our condition. We are going to rise together or we're going to fall together. But baby, whatever we're doing it together. Because the four great planetary challenges we face today, climate, nuclear weapons, managing AI now, and migration, only have planetary solutions. So either we organize the complex adaptive coalitions to address them and rise together, or we are going to fall together. But the notion that somehow we're going to do great here in America and we're going to disconnect from the world and do America first is a complete fantasy, which is why the last chapter of my book is America First, my version. And my version is that we become the first country to demonstrate to the world how you make out of many one when the many now is so much more diverse than when our founding fathers chose that as our national project. And if we can do that for the world, if America can be the first to do that, first among equals to lead it and first to actually model it, then we really can have the complex adaptive coalition we need to manage these planetary problems.
You've reported brilliantly from foreign capitals your whole career. But I think some of the most interesting and important reporting you've done is from China. And over the last few years, you've been reporting about the challenge of trust, that what seems to be a civilian application of AI technology could become a weapon with minor modifications. And it's precisely at this juncture of threat and opportunity that you placed the hopes for planetary collaboration. In one of your pieces, you say, can the United States and China maintain competition on AI while collaborating on a shared level of trust?
So I do believe that we live in a G2 world. It's the US and China. And so I spent a lot of time in China and I'm a regular visitor there. And my last visit last year, I was at the China Development Forum. I was asked to speak there. It's kind of their Davos, but it's not really like that at all. It's much smaller. It's invitation only. And at the end of the conference, they asked me if I would stay an extra day and speak to a group of Chinese economists. And I said, look, my name's Thomas Friedman, not Milton Friedman. I'm not an economist, But they said, no, we'd like you to give a talk about what you're thinking about on AI. So I talked to Craig before, my tech tutor, and I got up in front of the group and I said, I made this up. I said, I had a terrible nightmare last night. I dreamt it was the year 2030 and all that America could sell China was soybeans. And all that China could sell America was soy sauce. Now, why is that? So let me step back for 1 sec, if I could, Larry, and explain the whole frame for the second half of the book. It's all built on the concept of the very simple physics concept of a phase change. So a phase change is when you get a change in the state of matter driven by either a change in pressure or heat, or a change in energy. So from ice to water to steam, the most obvious example from your introductory physics class of a phase change. So Craig and I decided one day, we were just riffing about this. It was all triggered by me saying, that's the tip of an iceberg. And this is how we work. And then tip of an iceberg, what if this, and it triggered us. We sat back, we're just doing this at the breakfast table at the Jefferson Hotel, but it really turned out to be a fun thing for me and helpful for me to understand this. We said, what if you divided the history of the world up into 3 phase changes? We treated humans as H2O molecules and technology as heat. So we said, well, there would then be 3 phases of human history. The phase 1 we call the age of ice, or the age of tools, because molecules in ice are very separate and move slowly. That's what makes ice ice. Then it was how we built tools and language. And the age of ice lasts from the dawn of man to the printing press. Gutenberg printing press heat melts the ice H2O molecules into water. Now ideas flow, people flow, capital flows. The age of, we call it the age of information or the age of water. It lasts until 2017, really, the birth of the transformer algorithm, which really makes AI possible. 2017, 2020, 2022, ChatGPT. And we enter what we call the age of vapor and the age of intelligence. Because AI now, it boils the water into steam. And thinking of AI as a vapor is very useful, because unlike any other technology, it's not like microchips. AI is going into everything. It's going into your glasses. It's going to go into your shoes. It's going to go into your toaster. It's going to go into your refrigerator. It's going to go into your car. It's going to go into your desk. It's going to go into this chair. Ooh, Larry, when you asked Tom Friedman that question, the chair told us, because the world's going to speak to us, you really made him uncomfortable. It's going everywhere. And when AI is a vapor, everything becomes TikTok. Notice that little problem we've had with TikTok? Who controls the data? Who controls the algorithm? We can't let a Chinese company own TikTok. What happens when everything is TikTok? So Larry goes to his orthopedist. Orthopedist says, Larry, you need a hip replacement. Turns out the best hip replacement is made by Shanghai Hip Replacement.ai. I'm going to put this little baby in you. It's going to be broadcasting 24/7 about your physiology. It's going to be optimizing you, by the way, all the time. We control the data over here at Shanghai Hip Replacement.ai. Is Larry going to buy that hip replacement? Not unless we have a shared trust architecture for AI. And so unless we and the Chinese actually sit down and do something unimaginable in some ways, build enough trust that we can actually get a shared trust adjudicator, I can go into this for a long time, but I won't go deep, but that would actually judge every decision, whether it's in line with human flourishing or not. We're actually headed for autarky, which is that we're just going to sell them soybeans, and they're just going to sell us soy sauce. And this problem, I promise you, is going to be obvious before the end of the year. Right now, Trump has no clue. And he's recruited people in his administration. One way you got to work at the Pentagon was who was the biggest China hater. Now you sit down with these people and tell them, no, you got this completely wrong, unless we create a trust framework with China. And by the way, China's got the same challenge. Unless they do it with us, we are going to have a real problem. We're headed for autarky. And so, because AI is going into everything. And the reason this moment, and again, I think 2026 is the year all this happens. So fasten your seatbelt, put your seat back in tray table into a fixed upright position, okay, because this is the year AI hits. Now, the thing, again, why phase change is so useful. When you're an ice molecule of H2O, you have no idea what it's like to be water, a water molecule. And when you're a water molecule of H2O, you have no idea what it's like to be steam. You operate in a completely different way in a universe and whatnot. And as I shared at dinner last night with Larry, that whenever people ask me what time it is, whenever people ask Craig and I what time it is, we don't give them a time. We don't give them an hour. We give them a temperature. The time is exactly 211.9 degrees Fahrenheit. And water boils at 212. we are 1/10 of 1 degree away from the mother of all phase changes, and you have no idea what's coming around the corner, any more than a water molecule knows what it's like to be a steam. And we're basically here thinking we're going to manage steam with an ice tray. Good luck. I should have warned, I can ruin any dinner party. And I do weddings and bar mitzvahs. Just call anytime. So it's...
We're going to pick up on that theme in a second. We're going to open things up in a second, so that's your shout out. You've talked about 3 civil wars. The first 2 were very violent, and we're entering in your analysis, or we're on the cusp of a 3rd civil war. And so I want to ask you, and those of us familiar with and lived through what's happened here in Minneapolis are very sensitive. Are you anticipating that the path ahead is not going to necessarily be peaceful, that it could be drawn out and one with significant contention and conflict?
Well, the best way I can answer that, Larry, is just very quickly. So the second half of my book is, first chapter is the second Big Bang. The second Big Bang creates the Polycene. But what's the next chapter? Because then the one after that is our 3rd Civil War over home, which is where I think we are. But there's a chapter in between. And it's called The Worst Thing That Happened in My Career. What's the worst thing that happened in my career? Worst thing that happened in my career is that we lost our mangroves. So being a Minnesota kid, I didn't have a lot of experience with mangroves, these amazing forests that grow on the edge of ocean and land, right at the intersection. But in 1990, when was it? 1998, Glenn Prickett, who ran Conservation International's international program, then took me to the Atlantic rainforest, and I got to experience mangroves. And mangroves do 4 amazing things in nature. They filter toxins and pollutants. They create nurseries for young fish to grow because they have very cabled roots, so big predator fish can't get in. They buffer storms. The towns in Indonesia that took out their mangroves got wiped out by the tsunami. Those that kept them got buffered. And they hold the shore in place. And the worst thing that happened in my life is that we lost our mangroves, but not just in nature. See, it used to be a mangrove that if you had unprotected sex with a stripper, 5 weeks after your wife gave birth of your son, you wouldn't be running for president. Because shame used to be a mangrove. Small town newspapers were a mangrove. It used to be if you had the honor of being on the Supreme Court, your wife wouldn't be allowed to fly the American flag upside down because elite responsibility was a mangrove. All these normative habits and rules, they were all mangroves. And that, as we've learned now in watching Trump operate, the laws on the books aren't going to save you. It's the norms that people apply them with. So Big Bang, Polycene, and what happens right after we birth the Polycene, which is like a hurricane come ashore to Minnesota, and what do? We take out the buffers, the normative buffers. And that triggers what I call our 3rd Civil War about home. Because home is a really powerful image for me and for everybody. I mean, it's something so central to our identity. And because I grew up in a wonderful home here in Minnesota, by home I mean a community where people felt connected, protected, and respected, which is my friend Andy Karsner's definition of community. I always said St. Louis Park was my anchor and my sail, because it anchored me, it propelled me, So I'm very sensitive to home. Dorothy had it right. There's no place like home, okay? And you can cut my salary, you can take my job, but if you make me not feel at home in my own home, oh, watch out. That's like stepping on a hill of fire ants. And right now, around the world, there are a whole bunch of people asking, whose country is this anyway? Whose community is this anyway? And our first Civil War was between people who said, I can't feel at home unless I can enslave a black person. against people who said, I can't feel at home if you do enslave a black person. We had a civil war over that. Second civil war is, I can't feel at home unless I have a separate lunch counter that black people aren't allowed to attend. And I can't feel at home if you do. And after each one, we had a reconstruction. That 1960s was the Civil Rights Act. The first was the Emancipation Proclamation. We're now in our third civil war, we're home. Only now the issues are more complex because it's the Polycene. So it's been made polymorphic. So this civil war is about three things. It's, first of all, about race. Only now it's not about minorities, it's about becoming a minority-majority country. So it's about race. Secondly, it's about pace. The pace has just gotten so fast. They go to the grocery store, the woman at the cash register isn't wearing a baseball hat anymore. I go into the men's room, and there's a woman there. I go to my office, and my boss has rolled a robot up, and it's studying my job. My sense of home, my sense of place, my sense of cultural norms, and my sense of work have all been destabilized at the same time. And along comes a guy named Trump who says, I've got the answer. We're going to build a wall. The wall was not just for immigrants. The wall was a wall against the pace of change. And lastly, it's about place. A lot of Americans can't afford a home anymore, even a starter home. And we have lots of police and teachers now working in cities and towns where they can't afford to live. What's more screwed up than that in terms of a sense of home? So we're in our third civil war over home. And the only way to, I think, fix it is by restoring our mangroves. That is and the mangroves come in different forms. And we have to restore our political mangroves because, again, as my teacher Dove says, we're not divided, we are being divided. Okay, Donald Trump last night, you saw that on display. That was not the speech of a normal president. That's a guy who wants to govern by division, not addition. Okay, and so we have, Larry and I have talked a lot about this, we have structurally polarized ourselves. And you know, you can be a really moderate centrist person like me, but if you're in a structurally polarized situation, you're not going to get very far. And so we have to structurally change these kind of things, and we can go into that, you know, how we do that with primaries and whatnot. We polarized ourselves by massive income gaps. You can't, you know, so we need to basically bring the edges in. We need to widen the middle. We need to bring the temperature down with social networks. I think all the stuff Jonathan Haidt is talking about, don't give your kids a phone, don't put them on social media. I'm proud to say I have never looked at Twitter, I've never looked at Facebook, I've never looked at TikTok, I've never looked at Instagram, and I've never smoked a cigarette. And my plan is to die saying all five, okay? And because I consume no social media, in my world, everybody likes me, okay? And I say that only as a joke because it's not true, but I don't have to hear from the people who don't. And so I didn't come here today and sit down with Larry and the first day say, Larry, did you see that tweet about me? That was so unfair. So I leaked no energy, you know? So whatever you're tweeting about me, y'all have fun, but I'm not there and I won't be tweeting about you. And so we need to depolarize ourselves. At the same time, we need to get back to church. Boy, this was when we need 20 commandments now. 10 for humans, how we use this incredibly powerful tool, and 10 for the AI. This was a really, really bad time to stop going to church, to houses of worship, because I've always believed that the more complicated the world gets, the more everything you learned in Sunday school matters more than ever. Starting with the first thing you learned, the golden rule, do unto others as you wish them to do unto you. Because we live in a world now where more people can do unto you farther, faster, deeper, cheaper than ever before, and vice versa. And so norms, values really matter now more than ever. And obviously with the AI. I just leave you with one story because it's really relevant to this point. In 1999, I wrote a book called Lexus and the Olive Tree. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and I'm at the Portland Theater, and I'm doing a book event. Guy stands up in the balcony, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Okay, you up there, last question. Last question always gets you in trouble. And he says, Mr. Friedman, I have a question. Is God in cyberspace? I said, I have no idea. And I felt really stupid. And this is 95. Remember, cyberspace, Netscape goes public in 95. It was just 4 years old. So I called my spiritual teacher. He's a Talmudic scholar in Amsterdam named Remarked, one of these people, my thought partners. I met him when I was the New York Times correspondent in Jerusalem. Brilliant Talmudist, married to a Dutch priest, lives in Amsterdam. Okay? I track him down there. I say, Tzvi, I had a question I've never had before. Is God in cyberspace? What should I have said? He said, well, Tom, in our faith tradition, we have two concepts of the Almighty. One is the Almighty is almighty. He smites evil and rewards good. And if that's your view of God, he sure isn't in cyberspace, which is full of pornography, gambling, cheating, and people smearing one another on Twitter every millisecond. He said, but fortunately, we have an alternative concept of the Almighty, and that is that the Almighty manifests himself by how we behave. So if we want God to be in cyberspace, we have to bring him there by how we behave there. That's the only way God is going to be in cyberspace. And I think that issue of mangroves, norms, is just more important than ever as we get more super empowered and as we spawn this super intelligent species. Remember, AI is not a new tool. It's a new species. And time is very short before we train it with the right values. And we don't become its pet.
Great, let's get some reactions or comments or questions, directions. Yeah, and briefly introduce yourself and then a brief question.
My name is Samaya Naruzi, and I work in the AI program at Mayo Clinic.
So, oh, wow. Very cool. Are you a doctor?
No, I work within the AI program implementation of artificial intelligence within the healthcare.
Wow.
So the question that I have is that we used to, in the past 80 years, lead the planetary cooperation around the world. And there were dictatorships and regimes that they were against it. But now it seems that the United States is trying to renegotiate the social contract both domestically and overseas. How can we be the ones that are leading, that are building trust with this diverse world that we are living in, and kind of convince all this diverse many while the one is not leading with example? Thank you.
Really good example. Really good question. Next question. So no, that's a really good question. And that's really what I'm focused on. And so my short answer, I'll give you a short answer and a long answer. The short answer is the decent, good people in this country from center left and center right need to get together and win the 2026 midterm election. Because I'm a Leninist in my politics. Everything is about power. If you don't have power, you don't have anything. You can rail against these guys all you want till the cows come home. But unless people of decency from center right and center left come together and win power, none of that's going to change. Because I believe if you look at what you've described, what's your first name? Samaya. If you look at what's happened, we've made a radical departure in our foreign policy. We are abandoning the Atlantic Alliance. We've made a radical departure in economic policy. I mean, driving the deficit in crazy ways, the corruption around the president. I mean, this is just, being given a 747 jet by just these kinds of economic and geopolitical departures historically are only associated with wars or an economic collapse. That's the only time in our history you see this kind of 90-degree right turn. So why is it happening now? It's not happening now because we all voted for this. By the way, it's not happening now because average Republican voters voted for this, okay? Did anyone remember the debate during the last elections about the future of the Atlantic Alliance? You know, that we'd like to get rid of Canada or take it over? I mean, did I miss that debate? You know, this is crazy stuff. And it's a product of the fact that Trump 1 was surrounded by buffers, and Trump 2 is surrounded by amplifiers. And we have a crazy accident of events where a guy who believes a lot of wild radical stuff that are superstitions, like that tariffs are a tax cut, okay? Tariffs are many things that they are not a tax cut, okay? And if you believe that, that's a superstition. That is not even an economic debate, all right? But when you control the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and you're completely unbuffered, your superstitions become American foreign policy. So this is a complete anomaly. These kind of radical moves are only associated with a war we haven't had or an economic collapse we haven't had. They're the product of one person's whims. I mean, I'm going to have 147% tariffs on China one day. Did we have a debate among the deputies committee about that? Came up from one guy. We're going to invade Greenland. These are crazy ideas from an unbuffered person. Now, that doesn't mean, you know, some things are true even if Donald Trump believes them. And when he does the right thing, I actually support him, you know, because we only got one president and I don't have time to wait 4 years. But so I had breakfast with a group of school superintendents this morning, and one of them was from East Africa and Somali. And it was so poignant to me because he had watched the State of the Union last night and said, Mr. Friedman, can you tell me, why is the president talking about me? As a Somali, I felt, my heart, like he took it understandably, like that the president of the United States is saying, my community are garbage. And I tried to answer by saying, I know you can't but take it personally, but don't. I promise you we didn't have a vote, okay, on this. And so, and I'm not saying, you know, there aren't conservative and liberal questions, and we can debate all of those things. But this right turn we've experienced in geopolitics, you know, and economics, this is the product of one completely unbuffered nut, okay? And now that doesn't mean the nut can't be right about other things or that he didn't touch certain things. But this is not someone who's done his homework. This is not someone who can even explain why tariffs are the way to, you know, economic growth, which literally no economist in the world except the double nuts he's gathered around him would tell you, you know, or that why we should be abandoning Canada as an ally. And so this is just crazy stuff. And I don't have time to win the debate. I just want to win the 2026 election.
Michael?
First, I'll say, Dr. Adam, I'll pass on that your heart is still holding
Say that
for
again?
him. Dr. Adam, who you're referencing, the Somali gentleman, his
interesting.
principal. And
Oh, yeah, that's
I'll
what
pass
it was.
on.
Yes, you please, yes.
So, Michael Van Koolen with Open Path Resources, the Islamic Civic Society of America. I'm listening to you, and I'm so with you and riding the waves of what you're talking about. And fear comes to mind as a very dominant idea. And when you want to assert the idea that America can lead, America should lead, when we think of a lot of what America produces in the world, fear of or fear for, left, right, if you'd like, you know, it's very hard to imagine that quality, policies, ideas, directions come from that basis of fear. So I offer it to go two ways. What's behind that?
The fear?
The fear. And is there anywhere a demonstration of a solution to that dominant tack in policy shaping?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And you know, we could probably go on all afternoon. The right is going, you know, the Trump, you know, I think he's gone to a radical extreme. But it's not like the left hadn't had their own dabbling with radicalism, okay? And the whole move toward identity politics was, in my view, the left's own insanity. To say that, competitive victimhood and all of these things. Because what it did was eventually create a world where a lot of white males felt they were completely out of it, and they turned to their tribal leader named Donald Trump. And so I think both the left and the right, need a look in the mirror. I told this story to Larry last night. I was in Florida for the Super Bowl, and I was staying up in Juno Beach, and a friend of mine was living south of Palm Beach, invited me to come watch the game. So I drove there, and I was a little late, so I turned on the radio to listen to the opening kickoff. And I turned it on just before the national anthem and Brandi Carlile singing America the Beautiful. And I was alone in my car, and I'm a huge Brandi Carlile fan, so I was singing along. And I got to the verse, and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. And it was the first, as many times as I've heard that song, it's the first time I heard that verse. And crown thy good with brotherhood. Wow. Bates, who wrote the poem, was saying, brotherhood is the supreme good. Above good, crown thy good with brotherhood. Whether you think good is like bounty or good is good acts, the goal is brotherhood. Wow. And I think both the left and the right really got away from that. And I have a real problem with that. And so my book ends with my favorite columns. Like, I got, I'm in 1995, 30 plus years of them. Something, again, has to be your favorite columns. And there's a series of them. I'll tell you my all-time favorite. 2017, I used to travel with the U.S. military a lot, and would to this day if Hegseth weren't there, because now no general will dare take me. So 2017, Dave Goldfein, who ran the U.S. Air Force then, Chief of the Air Force, calls me up and said, would you like to come with me? I'm doing a tour of every U.S. air base in the Middle East at the height of the ISIS war. I said, Dave, that sounds like so much fun. Sign me up. So we'd fly from Washington to Ramstein in Germany, and then from there to Al Udeid Air Base, where CENTCOM is commanded, in Qatar, biggest air base in the world. And we land. It's a Tuesday night, and I'm a Tuesday for Wednesday columnist. It's a Tuesday night, and I open my computer. Sometimes in my job, you're in the right place at the right time. And sometimes you're in Al Udeid Air Base when Charlottesville has just happened. And everyone in the country is talking about Charlottesville. And your foreign affairs columnist is in Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, thinking, what do I write? Now, sometimes I open my computer, and it's like I've got an avatar over my shoulder saying, I wonder what he's going to write, And I literally was staring at like a blank screen. What do I? Because you don't want to be so off the news, you know what I mean? And then it hit me what to write. I said, folks, and you can look up the column. I don't remember exactly how I said it, but don't know what's going on in Charlottesville. But just want to tell you what I'm up to. I'm actually traveling with the Chief of the Air Force, General Goldfein. He's Jewish. We're traveling with Heather Wilson, Air Force Secretary. She's a woman. We're traveling with her Chief Executive Officer. She's an African-American Air Force Lieutenant Colonel woman. We just landed at Al Udeid and got a briefing from the base commander. He's Armenian-American. His deputy is Lebanese-American. His deputy, actually Heather's deputy, is named Cesar. And we ended the day with a briefing by Captain Yang. Mr. President, which part of this sentence don't you understand? This is the source of our strength. Not what was ever going on in Charlottesville. And so my model for America, actually, is the U.S. military. Because they know how to make out of many one with a meritocracy. because they have a mission that unites them all, and because they give everybody the tools that they need and deserve to compete in that meritocracy. And that's the only way you can be for meritocracy, if you're also giving people equal tools to compete in that. But the military has managed it. And so, you know, when I was listening to Brandy Carlisle, I'm a pretty good listener, I noticed I'm in my car, so I couldn't see it. I noticed that cheer went up in the middle of her, so I thought it was like a flyover. So when I got to my computer, I looked it up on YouTube. It's when they flashed the US military saluting the 332nd Expeditionary Team from the Middle East. So I'm a huge believer that the secret sauce to repair the country is actually hiding in plain sight. You know, that the military, through a lot of trial and error and failure and, you know, whatnot. I got picked up at my hotel this morning. My friend Hamza Warfa from World Savvy hosted a breakfast for me with school superintendents. It was fantastic. So if you're near me, I will interview you. So, I mean, I get in my Uber, and it's a Somali woman driver. I know from the thing, your name is Suad. No, it's Huda, sorry. And so we start talking, and I asked about her kids, her family, where are your kids now? She has a daughter in the Air Force. And I'm thinking, I'm in Minneapolis, and Huda's taking me to Hamza, you know? And can't make that up, you know? And so I think something really powerful has happened here, but we need to read it the right way, you know? And it's about how we leverage this to make many one in a much more diverse America. And I think where the far left was and where the far right were incredibly destructive. And this new kind of neighborliness is really the way forward. And if you're looking for a model, it's what the US military has done. That's my bias, yeah.
One of your colleagues particularly liked was your reporting from Wilmer. And you really got kind of deep into the fabric of Wilmer, and it's along these lines about kind of, you know, what Minnesota is showing.
So the backstory of that is 1948, my dad's sister and brother-in-law, my uncle was in a D-Day and came back to Minneapolis after the war. And they decided that they were going to set off to find their fortune in Wilmer, Minnesota. And start a little steel distribution company there called High Steel. My uncle's name was High. And they moved to Wilmer in 1948. And at the time, Wilmer was 99.999% white, Protestant, Catholic, German, Scandinavian, and had 3 Jewish families, one of whom was my aunt and uncle. They were the exotica in town. And my aunt used to go into schools and whatnot, teach about Hanukkah and all this kind of stuff. If you look at the Wilmer newspaper, you'll find my name all over it. Bev Rosenbaum's son, a nephew, Tom Friedman, won a Pulitzer Prize. You know what I mean? Just like, it was a great small town like that. You know what I mean? And so I went to Wilmer for 50 years. And I really, you know, got a feel for the community. Around 1975, my aunt comes down to a family event, pulls me aside, says, Tom, I was in the grocery store on Saturday, and I heard someone speaking Spanish. Spanish. It was her first encounter with the other. And she never forgot it, and I never forgot it. So fast forward, 5-6 years ago, I guess it was, a woman named Dana Mortensen, who runs World Savvy, you know, comes to see me in Washington, says, would you give a free lecture for World Savvy? I said, I'm a very transactional person. What's in it for me, okay? And I said, well, tell me about World Savvy. I don't know anything about it. Where do you work? And we work here, we work there. We do this great work in schools, including in here and there in Wilmer. Wilmer? You work in Wilmer? Okay. I said, here's the deal. You set up a trip for me to Wilmer, a day there, and I'll give you a free lecture. So I come, and this is how I meet Hamza. So she recruits Hamza, because he was close to the Somali community there. And I bring an Israeli friend of mine, Giddy Greenstein, who's an expert on small towns in Israel. This is like a joke, so a Somali, an Israeli, a Minnesota kid, get in a SUV and go to Wilmer, a bar in Wilmer, And our first stop is Wilmer High. Wilmer High School, we're met by the principal, which Dana and Hamza arranged. And they show me the steel map over the lobby, now world map, at Wilmer High. And they say, at the beginning of the year, students take out a ladder and they put pins in the map of where everyone in the senior class is from. Because Wilmer today is 40% Latino and Somali. That map was donated by the people who bought my aunt and uncle's steel company, West Central Steel. So we're in the lobby and we're just standing around and it's breakfast time. So the kids come out, I guess they get coffee and rolls, because they start the day early. And I look into the scene and it's a Benetton ad, just like. So I say to the principal, do you have to have diversity class? He said, yeah, we tried that. They told us to get lost. Because Zhao is now dating Juan's sister. Juan's sister is best friends with Mustafa's brother. It's just natural for them. And my hope is that is as natural for them as Jews and Swedes in St. Louis Park was for me. You know what I mean? And my hope is that when they are running things, and I sort of feel like that's what we saw here a little bit. I'm starting to feel like what happened here in the last 2 months, was kind of the rise of, it was a different thing. I heard a great word this morning at this breakfast with Hamza. People were doing neighboring. Well, I never heard that as a verb. Neighboring, that's a beautiful word. And I think that we're seeing this, where people take this natural, I don't want to romanticize this, it's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back and all. But I think we're seeing now the ethic of that this is who we are, okay? And this is who we're going to be. And we're going to make this work. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing here. And I'm full of pride for it. And look, I've said this many times, I've written it. My column's called Foreign Affairs, or it was, we took the names off them. But my column, if it had an honest name, would have been called Always Looking for Minnesota. Because basically, and this has been a great liability for me, I'll tell you as a columnist, I can find the Minnesotan wherever I go, okay? So I can go to Iraq and be super optimistic because I find people in Iraq want just what I want for Iraqis. Unfortunately, there's other people who wanted other things, you know what I mean? But I do think, I keep telling people this story in the Hanukkah liturgy. There's a phrase, Nes Gadol Hayasham, a great miracle happened here. I think something really important happened here.
Call to the democracy. It's what I hear in Wilmer, is what I hear.
Say that again.
It's our call to our democracy.
Uh-huh. And what do you mean by that?
When Lutherans, I'm sorry, and I won't dominate.
No, you're not dominating.
When the Lutherans and Catholics in St. Cloud, Minnesota growing up,
Yeah.
that was our diversity.
Right.
And the concept of democracy wasn't so earth-shattering,
Right.
important and critical and complex. As the Hmong arrived, as the Latino population,
Right.
as the Somalis arrive,
Yeah.
and we see, and they're less than 1% of our population, yet we see
Yeah.
them so dominant.
Yeah.
It's our opportunity to call to the democratic practices and values and skills. Each time in this state, it's been more apparent that we're being called to our democracy. And I think that's what I'm hearing in you when you say you're looking for the Minnesotan, you're looking for that democratic connection. And so
I'm looking for how to make out of many one with a much more diverse, now Minnesota and America, because that is our project.
Kathy?
Thanks for being here. Kathy Tunheim, I own a consulting company here in the Twin Cities. I want to ask about leadership attributes. Over your 50 years, and I've loved reading all those years, thank you for your work.
Yeah.
You have seen leadership in really difficult, extraordinary circumstances. So as we sit here today, what are some of the attributes or characteristics you think we need to be finding in the leaders we need?
I have a short answer to that, and again, from one of my teachers, Dov Seidman. I think the best leaders have 2 attributes. Not only 2, but they definitely have these 2. They put more trust into the world, than they take out of it, and they put more truth into the world than they take out of it. And there may be other things that good ones do. They make hard decisions and all of that, but they're people who bring more trust and more truth.
What do you mean by more trust?
I mean that they know how to build healthy interdependencies. So I have a chapter in my book. It's called "What You Say When You Listen." Biggest lesson I learned as a journalist. So I was a Jewish kid from St. Louis Park who wanted to cover the Arab Muslim world in the 70s. That was not a natural thing, okay? And at that time, the New York Times had a rule. You couldn't be Jewish and go to Beirut or Jerusalem. Couldn't be fair, Well, I broke both those rules. And I didn't do it by going out there, as people know, by saying, you're all great, you're all wonderful, all the other guys' fault. I'm in everybody's face, And how did I survive? I survived by being a really good listener. Because I learned that two things happen when you listen. One is what you learn when you listen. So all the stories I got wrong were because I was talking when I should have been listening. I can tick them out for you. But the other thing that happens when you listen is listening is a sign of respect. And it's amazing what people would let me say to and about them if they thought I respected them. And if people think you don't respect them, you can't tell them the sun is shining. But if people think you respect them, it's amazing. And that's why I say what you say when you listen is the most important thing you can say of all. And so that's something, and so I actually changed my business card in 2015 from New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist to New York Times Humiliation and Dignity columnist. Because I realized I had spent my career watching people act out on their humiliation, whether it was Palestinians at Israeli checkpoint, whether it was China after what it called a century of humiliation, Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's all about humiliation and dignity. And that's all I've been doing basically is covering people, Ukraine, Hamas. It's all about acting out on humiliation and questing for dignity. And so I really try to be a good listener. I'm not doing it now because you're asking me questions, but stick around. I'll listen to you. I'll take out my notebook and, trust me. So, but and so leaders who are good listeners, I think that's a really, really important attribute. And when I say being a good listener, not like some politician just waiting for you to stop talking. There's a difference between that and deep listening, and really sort of taking it in, So, and the other thing is that I think to be a successful journalist, you actually have to like people. Like I really like people. And what I like is I love hearing like I did this morning, just so many, the crazy things people say and do and, that they fear and love and what they did for their neighbors and walking out in their bathrobes and their bunny slippers, and whatever it is, And it's amazing to me how many journalists hate people though. And how many hate politicians also. How many politicians hate people. So, and people can smell that from 100 paces, So if you don't enjoy listening to the music of people's lives, you're really gonna have a real liability. I think being a good leader or a good, but at the end of the day, it's about, making decisions, but most of all, it's about putting more truth into the world and more trust. And Donald Trump does just the opposite. I'm not I can say whatever I want. He lies as he breathes, literally. And so we've never had something like that before.
We're almost out of time, so last question, comment. Dave?
I can hear you.
My question has to do with Larry's mention of the word governance. And I've always thought that governance was the tool we had to implement social change. And so my question to you is that when we look at how the global economy in the world has malfunctioned over the last 3 decades, and the impacts that's had on a lot of working class people in America, what is the focus on governance, for instance, to try to change the way we manage trade in the world so that instead of undermining our local economies, it actually helps them to grow? And I say that as having been a long-term advocate, just to be clear, for having labor, environmental, and human rights structured into trade agreements, something we've never been able to fully achieve.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. You just described why I was a huge, and at the end of the day, maybe only, supporter of TPP, which was the first trade agreement that had, remember, it was negotiated by Obama and Hillary Clinton, that had worker protections in it, that had environmental protections in it. It was the best democratic negotiated labor agreement, trade agreement. And unfortunately, both Republicans and Democrats walked away from it in the end. I thought that was a huge mistake. Because there's a lot of ways to get poor as a country. There's no way to get rich as a country without trading. And at the same time, like, you know, sometimes I'm called a neoliberal, and as soon as somebody explains to me what that means, I'll either cop to it or not. You know what I mean? Because I just have no idea. I'm not particularly liberal, to be honest. And if I'm neo, I don't even know neo what. You know, so I just believe you began this with a really good question. I like the way you framed it. Governance. I'm a both and person, not an either or person. So on the border, I'm for a very high wall with a very big gate. On energy, I'm for all of the above, tending toward clean. I'm for better police and more police. I'm for growing the pie and redividing the pie. It's not because I can't make up my mind. It's because I have made up my mind that the synergy, the greatest energy, is in the both and, not in the either or. And I think what we got away from is not redividing the pie properly. And that, I mean, just taxing, but I mean, going back to that army and giving people the tools to be constantly able to keep up with this pace of change and taxing them, you know. So I just, to me, that's, when I get in these debates, my friend Michael Sandel and I, who's also from St. Louis Park, teaches at Harvard. And, we taught a course together twice at Harvard, actually. It was like pay-per-view. I mean, it was because Michael's, you know, much more to the left of me, and we would go back and forth on this. We taught it once with Larry Summers and once with Stanley Hoffman, and it was a class on globalization. It was wild, but this was the big argument we had, you know, and to me, it's don't throw out capitalism, but it's bring in better governance, and I think we failed our workers, you know, during these big changes beginning around 2000 by not being truly attentive, whether it was trade insurance, whether it was, you need to be very intentional, and I don't think we were intentional. And so I think it was a failure of governance, not of the concept of trade. I think, you know, Ricardo was right, Adam Smith was right, you know, but, and so I think what happens with each cycle of technology, the pace gets faster and faster, you know what I mean? And so being super attentive is really a problem. And what really worries me is, I think I said, 2026, circle your calendar, this is the year that AI hits. And I don't know what's gonna happen. I really, with workers and labor and whatnot, I'm very, very concerned. Because there'll be white collar and blue collar, you know. We have a friend of our family, you know, works at LinkedIn, and you know, their kid is just terrified seeing everyone around them fired, you know. And so I'm really, really concerned. And so I think we need to be super attentive in terms of governance for what is happening to people and what tools they need. And I just don't know. You know, one of the real problems of being an author today is I made my career writing current history. Beirut to Jerusalem, the world is flat. I could actually go to Bangalore, India, say, oh wow, I think the world is flat. Call up my editor and say, I need a 6-month leave. I want to write a book called The World is Flat. Take 6 months to write the book. Take another 6 months to edit it, print it, publish it. Have the book come out and have people say, I never thought of that. Oh, the world is flat. Today, oh my God. If you don't write the book in 30 days, the world has changed. You know what I mean? So I feel I've got like a butterfly net and I'm chasing a butterfly and I'm trying to capture it just in time. Well, what's true for me is true for governance.
Fantastic. Before we conclude, I just want to mention we've got a couple exciting events coming up. March 26th, we have our next Mondale Dialogues event with Sarah Binder, who's Professor at George Washington. She's going to be talking about the budget process that Walter Mondale helped to put in place that was meant to rationalize and avoid government shutdowns and large government deficits. What went wrong? Sarah Binder.
Stupid old Fritz, he thought they needed to raise taxes. Imagine that, you know.
It turns out he was a real stickler.
Exactly.
He was a real stickler for fiscal discipline. And then on April 16th, Theda Skocpol is going to be here from Harvard talking about politics in the time of Donald Trump. There will be a recording of this terrific conversation in 1 or 2 days, and you can find it in all your favorite podcasts. Finally, if you enjoyed this event, consider making a donation. It's always appreciated. But mostly, Tom Friedman, thank you so much. This is
Thank you. That was
absolutely
great.
fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you.